The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. I've started the broadcast here at 12 o'clock, and what I'd like to do is talk to you guys about session number 3 here of Creative Cloud New Features, and it's Adobe Illustrator today. And I'll show you guys a seminar page and sort of give you an overview of some of the topics I would like to do with you. But I'll quickly go in and just give you a quick introduction. So, Adobe Illustrator Creative Cloud New Features. My name is Greg, although I'm signed in as Craig, and you may have heard that my name might have been Michael. I'm Greg. I'm doing this. Again, here at Eliquo, or here where I am at Eliquo, I am an Adobe Certified Expert and an Adobe Certified Instructor in Adobe Illustrator, as well as Adobe Photoshop and Adobe InDesign. And again, this is what we do here all day, is teach these particular items. I'd like to point out this is a very old picture of me, so if you can see this red color I'm working on, I am, for one, currently wearing glasses, and further, my beard is much longer these days. So sort of imagine something like that, and that's what you're dealing with currently. So I thought I'd do that quickly. Now, to talk about what I'd like to do with you guys, this is our website, eliquo.ca. I'm just on our home page. And again, that's on the left side here. I've got seminars and workshops. Session 1 and 2 are finished already, and note, Session 2, the Photoshop session, is up on our page here, allowing you guys to be able to view it. We're down here at Session 3. These are, again, the Illustrator Creative Cloud New Features. When we are done this seminar, we're going to be posting this one on this page as well shortly afterwards. Okay, but quite simply, we are going to get started here, guys, with the, again, custom toolbars and enhancements to the workspace overall. Something that's not listed here, I'm also going to talk to you guys about our libraries and how to work with them. So, but a new toolbar is a pretty nifty option, and I'd like to show that, and a couple of other enhancements to the workspace. Live rectangles and drawing enhancements are a big part of the new Creative Cloud. So again, we have now live corners, live rectangles, and new ways to work with lots of objects. So I'm definitely going to outline those features for you. And in fact, in depth, if there's anything you take away from this, it's probably that. And in fact, that'll be a sort of probably the most that we do in this seminar. The pencil tool and the pen tools are reimagined. And not only that, there's a couple of new tools as well. There's a curvature tool, and there's, again, a reimagined anchor point tool as well. So drawing has changed a little bit, and I'm going to show you guys some examples of that. Also, if you ever use a perspective grid, there are some changes and enhancements to this perspective grid as well. So I'm going to give you guys an overview of the perspective grid, some tips and tricks of something that's been around since CS5, but then talk to you guys about something that's a little new in the Creative Cloud and really makes that feature work well. I'd also like to remind you guys there are more webinars coming up. Again, the next one is Session 4, which is Adobe InDesign, and then that's the new Creative Cloud features in InDesign. These are the topics for that seminar. That seminar is going to be on Wednesday, February 11th, 2005, so that's next month, in February 11th we're doing so. All right, so I wanted to get this talked about and out of the way, and I'm going to get this out of the way as well. And to continue here, I am going to bring up Adobe Illustrator. Okay, now Illustrator is up, and Illustrator again uses this new darker interface that I'm a big fan of. If I don't like this interface, I can always come to my preferences and choose the interface preferences. This is in the edit menu for you PC users, but I'm going to Illustrator and Preferences. And I just want to point out there are interface preferences, the user interface. And again, instead of the medium dark option, we could choose a light option, or again, a medium light or a darker version, but I'm using the medium dark. So if I choose the light option, my screen changes. That's maybe a familiar look to those of you that are still using CS5. Those of us in CS6 or the Creative Cloud have this darker interface to now work with. Okay. Now, as always, I'd like to point out I have a lot of the tools and panels I want to work with set up. So I'm using a custom workspace, so I just have access to my tools. But part of this is talking about tools. So here's Illustrator's default tool set, and I prefer this double column of tools instead of the single column. These are the tools in Adobe Illustrator. And of course, the thing about Adobe Illustrator is there's a lot of tools. Okay, so there's quite a bit. Most of the tools expand to show tools below. And I find myself, again, needing access to things like the anchor point tool a lot, but at the same time I use the pen tool so often that it's kind of a pain to switch between them. Or again, down here, for example, is the Perspective Grid tool, but again, I also use the Prospective Selection tool a lot. Now, Illustrator does help you in one way. There's a tear-off you can always use for your tools, and this isn't new by any means. It allows you to tear the tools off and have this subgroup of tools to work with. You can do this anytime you like on any set of tools as necessary. However, there's a new idea in the CC version of Illustrator. I can come to the window menu and see tools. Now, of course, if I don't have the tools open, I would be choosing this option to make sure my tools were on screen. But note, I could say I wanted to make a new tools panel. So I need to, again, name it as I say I wanted to make a new one. So maybe I just call this one Seminar. But I give a name to my tools, and then when I say OK, what I now have is a blank toolbar along with my toolbar. Now what I then do is it's a drag and drop function to take tools that I want to work with and add them to this new toolbar. So for example, I think I always might want the selection tool on my toolbar and maybe the direct selection tool also. So again, I can drag that tool as well just below it. And then I can continue adding tools I use, like again, here's the pen tool. I can add that in. And then I can continue to click and hold, switch to the anchor point tool, add that tool in. That's, again, a new name for the tool also I'd like to point out. The tool used to be called the Add Anchor Point tool. Here in CC they've renamed it because it has a couple of new functions. And guys, just note I can then continue adding tools that I work with often, like the rectangle tool. Again, I use brushes, but maybe I add the pencil tool also. Or I'll point out below the pencil tool is another new tool called the Join tool. That's brand new to CC. In fact, that's brand new to the latest edition of CC. That didn't initially ship in CC. That shipped in the latest version, the 2004.1 version that was released in October. So this is the newest tool overall in Illustrator. So just note I did point out the Perspective Grid. I can add that into my toolbar. And again, I can add the other tool, the Prospective Grid Selection tool. You see, I could just keep going, adding tools I like. And I have the choice between the two views by using that expand option. Right? But again, tools can be expanded or contracted to be single or double columns. If I make my own tool set, I could either leave these back against the edge of the screen where they're kept by default, and now I can move this one maybe down here so they're closer to my drawing, or I could even get rid of this one by closing it and then just substitute my own tools over here on the side if I prefer. We just have all kinds of options now. If I ever close my tools, which I'm just about to do, it's just a matter of going back to Window, Tools, and there's my tools listed. So again, I can always bring back the toolbar that I've made and work with and just have set as my own group of tools as necessary. So I'm a big fan. I've been using that quite a bit. And again, I have made my own toolbars. And again, I do like the quicker access between a subset of tools is what I quite like. Okay. Now for this next step, I'm going to open a file. I'm going to go to Adobe Bridge because that allows me to open files relatively quickly and also preview them so I know I've got the right one. So I'm looking to open up this file right here. And I'm going to use this file to demonstrate some drawing, but I'd like to point out, guys, I'd also like to have Photoshop here. This is Adobe Photoshop I just switched to. I'm going to make sure I've got a file open in Photoshop also. Okay, and what I'll do, sorry guys, is I'll just quickly use Bridge to get another file here. I have a file in mind. These are files I'm currently using to teach a Photoshop class. So I've got a file open in Photoshop, I'd like to point out, and I'm working here in Adobe Illustrator. Now I haven't got much going on in this drawing, as you guys can see. It looks like I've got a logo for our company. It's on a black background. That's just a rectangle. I've got a little bit of a palm tree that I've drawn, and again, some squiggles and some lines. Okay, so these aren't circles or anything. These are just lines. And this, again, this is a line as well. Okay. Now, specifically, maybe I'll get rid of these items, so they're just out of my way. Another new feature that's brand new to the Creative Cloud, it also came out in this October release, is a library. So library is a panel that's always open. Now again, when your library isn't open, it is just a panel. We go to the window menu and we open the libraries. I have a library here already showing. Now the first thing about this library is I made it by using colors or text styles, as you can see, or graphics. Now what I'm also doing is I'm syncing here to my Creative Cloud account. So then there's a button down here that allows me to make sure I sync. This puts all my library items in Adobe's cloud, makes them available anytime I sign in on any computer using my Adobe account. It also makes it available, again, elsewhere. But this is a library I've built already, and these are common things you may want to reuse, like colors, common things you may want to use like styles, And common things, again, you may want to use like specific artwork. Okay, so specific artwork is as well library elements. Okay. And this would allow me to use them in other documents because, of course, I can make another new Illustrator file, be working in it, and, of course, it wouldn't have the same swatches or same setup, but the library is now available to have access to these colors or these objects. It's a matter of selecting what you want to work with and dragging it again to the page to work with it, for example. I'm reusing these elements. I can draw a new object that doesn't use these colors. In my swatches here, I don't have access to these colors, but I can then click here and use this specific color on the object. So I'm using the library as a resource, starting in this document into this one. If I want to add things into the library, it's a matter of selecting the artwork you want to add. So I have the logo here, guys, already added. However, the logo is just white. And again, simply it wouldn't work on it would work on a dark background. It would not work on a light background, for example. So maybe I add this element here, including the darker background, into the library. Guys, just note, I'm dragging and dropping is all I'm doing. Okay. Right now, you'll note it's synced to my cloud. So it's synced this element. Now what I'm doing is I've named this library Illustrator. You can make new libraries whenever you need to. So you just create a new library. You can make as many as you like. This one was created earlier. I named it Illustrator. I've added things into it. And that means I can just start dragging and dropping. It also means I could maybe start adding other elements like colors. So in Adobe Illustrator, I like these desaturated preset colors quite a bit. And if I just click on, again, these colors here, you'll note that they're adding in to, again, sorry guys, let's apply this correctly. Again, I'm going to. Of course, now it's not working correctly. I've already added the colors. So let's get on this to sync up here. But the colors have been added in as well by just simply clicking on them and adding them into the library. Now the feature I really want to show isn't so much using the library across the Illustrator files and having access to these items here. I've also got access in one other place. As I pointed out, I'm working in Photoshop at the same time I have a picture open. This is Photoshop CC as well, of course. And very specifically, over here in Photoshop, I also have the libraries. Now, of course, Photoshop could be showing a regular library by default. You see, it's just saying I'm not using a library. But because I've got this sync button included, the library I made in Illustrator, you have to click this button in order for this to work. But the library I made in Illustrator is also in this list. It says Illustrator right there. These are the items that are in that Illustrator library. And note the item I just even added a second ago is right here. So again, these are the elements I added in as I added them. Right? And what I could therefore do is I can now use these assets in Photoshop instead. So if I grab this logo and drag it in, it's going to add into this document. So that the pinwheel should just take a second here. It's now asking me to place it and size it. Because this came from Illustrator, it's a vector-based object. So I can scale it up a little bit by holding my Shift key, double-click it to actually, again, place it. And then I'm using the Move tool, and I can move it over to a new spot, of course. Note, the item is a Smart Object. It has a Smart Object layer properties, meaning it's still a vector-based element. And that means I can scale it any size I like, and again, it's not going to lose quality on the object. And note again, I've got these properties to work with. Or specifically, also note, again, I have these colors available too. So if I'm clicking on these colors, they are becoming my foreground color over here in Photoshop. So if I added new text or started painting, I am now painting with the colors that are found from my library. I think that's terrific because I can easily get colors I work with in Illustrator and use for logos into Photoshop to be able to work with. Libraries, again, are available between Photoshop and Illustrator. They're not available yet in the rest of the Creative Cloud, so it means I don't have them in InDesign, but it's possible we may see them there shortly. Again, it's a pretty good idea. Libraries also sync between your mobile devices. If you're using Adobe Illustrator Draw, which is the mobile version of Adobe Illustrator that uses your Creative Cloud account, or, again, Photoshop Sketch, again, the Photoshop version of Sketch built onto your, again, built-in. Your libraries are available there too, and it's the very same libraries. They sync through your account, even to your mobile devices. If I were to select the Type tool, I can add some text here. I'm just going to say exactly that. I'm saying adding text. This is still all in Photoshop, but note I am using the color that I had selected from before. Or if I make this text again significantly larger, you guys will note that again it's around 60 points. Maybe that's a bit bigger. The font is also again just simply a font named Monaco currently, so it's not very pretty as you can see. But again, what I can now do is I have some text in Adobe Illustrator. It's formatted using in Photoshop, and it's using Photoshop settings. But I can swipe this, and here's a style I made in Illustrator that I can apply to text in Illustrator that uses Myriad Pro. It's bold, condensed, and it's 12 points. I believe it also is all caps. And those are all settings I did back to formatting in Illustrator. If I click on this, note again, I can use this formatting from Illustrator on this item as well. Of course, if I manage to apply this correctly, let's try this again. There we go. Sorry, guys. And I had the text tool selected. I went to the Move tool, and there it is. There's the text formatted to 24 points, a different font and a different color, and those, again, are settings that I was working with back in Illustrator. So even styles, again, can transfer back and forth between the software. Okay. So let's say library. They're pretty handy and very, very, again, fairly easy to work with. So they can include colors, graphics, and even text styles. That's what we've got. Okay. I'm going to get these items out of my way here because they are in my library. What I'd like to now talk to you guys about are some other new features that are built into Adobe Illustrator. Something that's not really new is the pencil tool. Pencil tool has been in Illustrator since I can remember. It's always been around. But the pencil tool is now a little different. So before I even draw, I'm going to double-click it to open its settings. When it opens up, I have, again, a fidelity setting, which is similar to what was in the pencil tool before. But before, it used to have fidelity and smoothness. It had two settings you had to try and work through to apply it. They've merged that into one setting. Okay. Notice as well I have Keep Selected on, so as I draw, the path I'm drawing will still continue to be selected. What I like to do is I like to set it to the smooth option, but not all the way smooth. There's, again, 4 presets here. And I'm just setting it to the middle one. So instead of the center, I'm moving into the smooth side. When I say OK, it's now going to smooth out what I draw. So if I'm drawing something that's a little jagged, it will be a little more smooth than what you guys see. Note. Right? And again, the pencil tool still does a lot of similar things. If you don't like what you've drawn, you just work again. I'm only using a mouse here. I'm not using a graphics tablet, but I'm just drawing close to my line. And you see again, sorry, that one didn't work, but I draw close to my line and it ends up redrawing the line, of course. But if my line is a little jagged, what I end up drawing again ends up smoothing out. Again, the other side of that is to quickly put it into a more accurate setting. So if I were to double click again, I can move down to accurate, where it's going to follow my mouse or pen movements a little bit closer. And as I make something that's maybe a little jagged, it may follow those particular settings a little bit more. So I like it on that smooth setting. I got to be honest, that's the way I really like it. I found this is a lot easier to work with than the older tool. The other thing that's much easier to work with the new version of the pencil tool, so I'm just going back to my smooth setting here, is when the older pencil tool, if I wanted a closed shape, right, if I just draw like this and stop, that's an open shape, I've just drawn a line. But if I wanted a closed shape, I can just pick up drawing again and continue drawing from this new spot. As I approach where I started from, the start point, you would have to hold down the Control key and then hopefully try and get this right on top of it. I'm currently not using any modifier keys. I've just stopped drawing and I'm holding down my mouse button. And I'm not using any modifier keys. As I just move in towards that end point and let go, and let's just try that again. I apologize, guys. I'm going to come back and swing back around. As I come in to it, you see once I get there, it's at 0. I just have to let go and it closes. So if I don't want it to close, I don't have to draw towards the other end point. But if I want it to close, I don't need a modifier key anymore. I don't have to hold down Control or Command between Macs and PCs. I don't have to hold down the Option key. It's just a matter of coming back around to where you started to close the shape. So just know I'll get a 0 as I approach. I'm about 10 pixels away. And when I let go, it again closed the shape. Okay? So I'm liking that a lot about the pencil tool. But what I'm liking even more about the pencil tool is this. When I select the pencil tool, I can hold down the Shift key. And note my cursor changes again. I've got a line. That means the pencil tool draws straight lines, allowing me to draw a straight line with the pencil tool, which you could not do before in the earlier versions of Illustrator, and then switch to drawing more freehand. And now I'm drawing that sort of palm tree you guys saw me I was attempting or I had drawn previously. And I can draw more freehand, come back down to about here or so, okay, maybe let go, and then put my cursor down where I'd like it, hold down the Shift key and draw another straight line that's attached to, again, the line I just drew from, allowing me to alternate straight lines and curved lines. And so long as this item's selected, I could always revisit with the pencil tool and just redraw some of these shapes until I like the appearance, of course. So I'm finding I'm drawing a little bit better with this version of the pencil tool. Okay. So I'm liking that little shape, and maybe I'll keep it for a little while. Okay. Excuse me. Now another feature that we've got, and this other feature is a new drawing element. Now the thing about the Creative Cloud, and they're pretty excited at Adobe, is they're working very heavily with Windows with their Surface devices, and of course Windows devices also again offer a lot of touchscreen devices. So again, you have a full computer in Windows that again has full touch elements. Right? And again, they're expecting people to be drawing on devices. Again, remember that there's a version of Illustrator for your iPad also, the Illustrator Draw. So they're integrating finger techniques, and they're integrating tablet techniques, and integrating touch-sensitive elements. To aid you with touch sensitivity, they've added in a new tool. Now, I believe some of the things with the pencil tool would help when using, again, a finger on a screen to draw with. But this curvature tool that you can use with a mouse, and what it is it's an enhancement on the pen tool. You can use it with a mouse, and I often do because I don't have a Surface device. But again, you can also, again, use it to help draw on a tablet with your finger, for example. But I'm just using a mouse right now to demonstrate it. When you select this tool, again, you have to start with 2 points. The points are big, and as soon as you have 2 points, they connect. Now what I'm now doing is I can then click and move this point around, but I could revisit this shape and pull, and you see add in a bit of a curve to it. It just added an anchor point automatically. It took something that was looking like a straight shape to begin with and curved it, and I can modify this as well. I'm not changing tools here. I'm, again, just using the curvature tool. I'm just continuing to use the curvature tool is the idea. If this is all I wanted to draw, because you guys see there's similar shapes below, I just have to hit Escape on the keyboard, and I'm no longer drawing that shape, because it was going to connect and start drawing more shapes or so. But it was just a matter of clicking from here to there. I then just visited the center and pulled up and created the curve and created this shape, and I did so without having to change tools, which is the way the pen tool works. If you want something similar with the pen tool, you have to remember that you have to click, again, maybe add another anchor point, another one, and then I have to switch to the white arrow tool or direct selection tool, then pull out to create this, and then realize that I don't have the curves, so I have to then switch tools again to the anchor point tool, and then add in the curves, etc. Again, I was able to do these things a little bit quicker on account of using the curvature tool. And the curvature tool has a lot of great tricks as well, because it alternates between curves and straight lines. So you always start with 2 points, and then you move on to the next point. Note that, again, as I actually swing around, again, if I continue in a straight line, it's a straight curve. But if I just put it in here, you see that, again, I can start adding in a curve to what I'm drawing. Come around, and I'm still continuing to add curves to, again, where I'm clicking. And I'm just clicking on screen, and again, these curves are being added in. But after, again, closing the shape, for example, so instead of hitting Escape, I'm closing it, so it's a closed shape, I can still continue to use the same tool. So I'm still using the same tool. I can put my cursor anywhere I like and add a new point. Or I can double-click on any point, and again, convert that to a straight point. So again, this is now a straight point. This one's curved. So if I double-click it, you see it's a straight line between it. I'm just using the same tool and converting between straight lines and then also, again, curves. If I double-click this again, it goes back to being curved. So you note, again, I can convert between the two, all with just this one tool without switching tools. If you are drawing on a screen with your finger, this would be a big advantage. But I'm even finding it an advantage right now with the mouse. I'm just simply clicking on these elements and converting them. Or again, I can click on any single anchor point, hold, and move these points as well. But just note, they're not the traditional anchor points that you're used to with the handles, although they work in, again, a lot of similar ways. And I've got these options to draw these new curves and new shapes, and I use them to draw these shapes here. This wasn't drawn that way, but it's another line that I've drawn. Now, another thing that's not specifically new to Illustrator is joining things. So joining, for example, can be done with the pen tool. I recognize there's several ways to join things, but I like the pen tool. If I'm using Illustrator's pen tool, I can go to this end anchor point and click, and then hover over this one and click, and there's my little circle, and that joins these shapes together. So that's a joining option I'm going to undo that specific option. I could also click on this anchor point here and join it to this other shape. And you see I now have a straight line, again, connecting these items. And I can join, therefore, these two shapes together. That's all with the pen tool, and that's nothing new in Adobe Illustrator. However, there's other options. So note I just undid those steps also. Another option is I don't have these elements selected, and I can find this new tool they've named the Join tool. It's below the Pencil tool. So again, here's the Pencil tool, here's the new Join tool. The Join tool is brand new. It is the newest tool in Illustrator. It came with that CS 2014 October release. And what it does is you put your cursor over even an unselected line where there's an anchor point, and then you draw over to where there is an anchor point. Now you guys see there's a preview showing that I'm connecting the 2 points together. And notice that, again, I sort of dipped upwards with my mouse, and I see this very thick blue line. It's not going to join it in that way. It's going to average the shape and kind of guess at what I actually want. And you see, again, it's keeping a sharp point and guessing this. This is a new way to join things. Now, it's based on averages, but it's a very new way to join things, and it's creating a shape that's kind of complex and hard to draw, and I couldn't do with the pen tool. So I joined these elements together. Just like if I join these together with the pen tool, there'd be a straight line connecting them. If I join from this anchor point to this one here, you see it's keeping the rounded. It's anticipating that I wanted the circle or, again, the feature to continue. And, again, it's giving me, again, sort of these better painterly style shapes that continue the original shapes is the idea. So the join tool, I don't actually know what's going to happen here, guys, if I join or if anything, but the idea is I'm expecting it to, yeah, I need another shape to join, guys. But again, I didn't expect much there. But as a matter of just trying it out, we saw, though, I had a shape here, a similar shape there, and it didn't join them in the traditional method. It joined them, again, from a new point of view. Okay. So those are enhancements to the pencil tool. Those are enhancements as well to, again, the new tool, the join tool. The pen tool also has a slight enhancement. It's part of that curvature tool also. So when using the curvature tool, there's a function in the curvature tool called the rubber band that allows me to preview the shape and preview the way the line is working. That's the rubber band function. That item is a preference. If I go to my preferences, where we have our selection and anchor display preference, again, the idea is the rubber band option is turned on by default. So enable rubber band for curvature and pen tool, it says there. So it's already on. I leave it on because, again, I find it to be fairly useful. If I go to the pen tool, it's there too. So even the old-fashioned pen tool, if I start to click and I move to a new spot, notice it's showing me a preview of the line I'm about to draw, and I can now see the line. If I click and pull, I can see the curve as well, not just the handles. So again, that's the rubber band function allowing me to preview the line I'm drawing with both the curvature tool and also with the pen tool. Another new function as well, and this line that I just drew here, as I'll use as my example, I again have it selected. I drew some straight lines. If I don't even have this item selected, I could go back to a tool that's been around forever. In the pen tool group is the anchor point tool. It used to be called the convert anchor point tool, but they've modified the name. Now the old use for it was to select an anchor, select this tool, and click and pull and convert it from, of course, a corner point to a smooth point. Or I could click on the point and, again, convert it back to being a corner point. Or if I have these handles, I could do more. I could click on a handle to delete it, allowing me to have a single handle only, so a straight line on one side, a curve on the other, click and pull, and then I also had the ability to move a handle, allowing me to, again, have two handles that move in two directions when this line is edited later with the direct selection tool. Right? So two independent handles or broken handles. Right? Those features are still part of this tool. That's the same as before. What's new, however, is the ability to hover over a line that's not even selected and note note what I'm seeing here. Right, the line I'm working with isn't even selected, and when I hover over the line, it says path, but I get a new symbol that's showing me a reshape option, and it allows me to add a curve onto the straight line when it wasn't there. So if I start with something that's absolutely straight, like a rectangle, and I have nothing other than just a rectangle, I could come to this tool, click right in the middle, and pull and add curves onto these edges anytime I like when switching to this particular tool. So straight edges being, again, converted to curves, again, without even worrying about anchor points or without even worrying about adding anchor points or converting what they are. It just converts them more automatically for you. So that's again the anchor point tool, which again is the same as before, and then adds in a new property. Now from here, I just drew a rectangle, and that's a pretty important feature. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open another file, and in that other file, what I've done is I've just drawn a bunch of rectangles. I got a lot of rectangles here is what I have. Okay. Now, the yellow ones across the top represent the old-fashioned rectangle. So if I select one of those and move them down to where you can see it, this is identical to the type of rectangle you had in Adobe Illustrator CS6 and every version earlier. When it's selected, in the upper corner, it says path. So had I drawn a rectangle in CS6, then again, in the upper left corner, the selected object is listed as a path. Or specifically, the name in the layer panel of the selected item is path. And that's what happens. You draw something in Illustrator, Illustrator names it a path if it's a vector object. A rectangle would have been a path. When selected with the black arrow tool, the selection tool, there's a bounding box allowing you to scale the object bigger, allowing you to rotate it as necessary from the center axis only, but allowing you, again, to continue to work on this item. Okay. Now what's new, however, is when you now draw a rectangle, it doesn't start life as a path, it starts life as a rectangle. So if I select the rectangle tool and draw a new rectangle, and that's what these other ones are, these blue ones, the new rectangle is not named path at all, it's named rectangle instead. And it's the only shape that does this is rectangles. It's named rectangle instead, so that's the name also in the layer panel, rectangle. Okay. So these blue ones are all rectangles, the yellow ones are all paths. Now what does this mean? Well, one thing about a rectangle is when it's selected, I can go to the, right, see how I just selected it, I can go to these corners and just drag and add rounded corners. I can select any of these rectangles and drag to change the corners anytime I like. That's a property of a rectangle. That's, again, a little different. You've never seen that in Illustrator if you've only ever worked in CS6 or earlier. Okay. I undid those elements, but that's one property. To go a step further, I can go to the white arrow tool, the direct selection tool, click on it, select just one anchor point. And now you see I only have one dot showing, and when I drag that, I'm only adding a rounded corner to one object. Okay, so this is a live corner added to the shape that I can modify anytime I like. And instead of undoing that, I could just grab that corner and pull it back out, and when it moves in again as far as it can back into its corner, it just undoes it. And that's a property added to rectangles. However, rectangles aren't the only thing that have that property. You have that property essentially on any shapes that have corners. So even though these are paths and not rectangles, they have the same property. Or if I were to start drawing other familiar shapes, like let's say I draw a polygon. You guys know this is a pentagon here. Maybe I use my up arrow key. If you've never done this, continue to hold down your mouse. Use the up arrow key and add a point, or the down arrow key and subtract a point. So I'm again making a polygon, let's say, or a hexagon specifically. Or maybe I again draw a star as well. This will be a 5-pointed star, but I'll hold down the Option key, so it's not a sloping star. It's again a nautical star with again these straighter edges. This is the Option key or Alt on the PC. And then, again, note I've got these dots all over the star also, allowing me to select the star and again round the star also, or when using the white arrow tool, select a single point and round that single point only. Or, I'm undoing, select maybe the inner points of the star. So I'm selecting these 5 inner points of the star instead of the outer points by just using the Shift key. And now I have these items that represent the inner part. And therefore, again, I can create new shapes from what was a star originally, and then I can start putting these things back too by, again, just simply continuing to manipulate the shapes. Okay? So again, new shapes. Over here, I have the same option of being able to apply this. So if the feature has, quite simply, straight edges, whatever the shape is, it has a live corner for you to work with. But rectangles go a step further than this. What rectangles do, and this blue item that I'm pulling down into the center is a rectangle. Now what a rectangle has is it has more. Now the first thing about a rectangle is they don't have the bounding box around it anymore like a path does. A rectangle no longer has the bounding box, so if you'd like to transform it, I've been very much using the free transform tool. I select it, I switch to the free transform tool, then I'm able to scale it, then I'm able to rotate it if I like. But note, when selecting the free transform tool, there's this new heads-up widget that comes with it, allows you to, again, work constrained. So it means as I scale, it constrains without me needing to use the Shift key. It's a button now. This is a standard free transform, allowing me to, again, increase or decrease the size or width or rotate. But again, I've also got other features. The free transform tool has these as well, but you have to use modifier keys. But note, I can use the perspective option for a trapezoid style shape, or I could free distort entirely by choosing these options. These properties have always been built into the free transform tool, but you had to use the Alt key or the Shift key in order to achieve these features. So I'm using this tool a lot more, and I'm liking this widget that shows up a lot more with it. I'm undoing these elements, but I wanted to scale this item, so I switched to the free transform tool and its new heads-up display. Now when you have a rectangle selected, then you can find your way to the transform panel. When getting to the transform panel, note that I have these new properties. So for one, this is the regular rotation. The problem with that is if I go to a path and I rotate it, let's say 15 degrees, as soon as I hit enter, it's rotated, but it rotated 15 degrees. It reset itself back to 0. When I select a rectangle, and only a rectangle, there are rectangle properties now in the transform panel with a new option for rotation, allowing me to say 15 degrees, deselect the object and come back to it where it keeps the transformation, allowing me to put it back to 0 or another amount. Okay, so it gives me those specific options is what it does, which I don't get with a regular path. The other thing it allows me to do, and guys, what I'm doing is I'm just undoing until it's back in its original location. This is my favorite part. If I have these paths, I can select across them. So you can see the width refers to the width of these 6 items in total, and so does the height. So if I change the width here from 10.3 that it is to, let's say, 12, then you see there again, I had constraint on, so the height got bigger as well, but simply again, all of them got bigger, so I don't really know how big a single item is. Again, they all got larger. That's the thing. The whole selection got larger. Now there's a slight difference here. When I click here, I have the original size of the item, which is 5.1 inches or 1.5 inches. It says the same thing down here for the width and height, 1.5 inches. But note, if I select all of these rectangles, then up here it's telling me how big the selection is. I want to make the selection bigger. I would make it bigger here. Here's again the selection by height. But what happens is, across these items, I'm getting, and sorry guys, one of these widths isn't the same, so allow me to delete that when I was moving around. Across these items here, let me just put in 1.5, sorry. But across these items here, it's talking about the width of these items individually. So instead of being the width of the selection, it's the width of the individual rectangles, allowing me to say I would like the individual rectangles to be 2 inches wide, or again, maybe shorter is better, maybe again 1 inch wide, for example. And individually, the width is 1 inch wide of, again, the rectangles is the idea. And individually, I'm able to say I want the height to maybe be 1 inch wide, which you guys see is impossible to do here because I have to deal only with the selection. So I was able to make these items 1 inch by 1 inch on their own individually while they're inside of a group. The other thing we have for rectangles is the ability not only to have the rounded corners, and I'm using a measurement here, guys, for the corner, but the ability to actually change the corners. Right? So again, I can make sure that one corner has a measurement, but instead of just using only rounded, there's other presets. So each corner can be different, and there's other shapes or presets available. Okay. So rectangles are, again, new, and live shapes are new as well as new options. Now, if you don't want these properties, though, you can convert between the two. So, for example, these items at the top are yellow, and when I select them, they are paths. If I would like them to be a rectangle, I can say Object, I can then say Shape, and convert to rectangle. And then this item now is a rectangle, and it therefore has rectangle properties, where this item is still a path and doesn't. But I promoted it to being a rectangle. Or, if you were to draw a rectangle in an older version of Illustrator and start working with it, it would still be a path. If, for example, I go to the Pen tool, and I elect to draw a rectangle with the Pen tool, instead of with the rectangle tool, the long way around, I'm just using the Shift key. I'm adding points. When I draw this particular shape, and I joined it up at the end, this was drawn with the Pen tool, so it's named a path. It's not, again, a rectangle. It's a path is what it is. So because of that, again, it doesn't have the rectangle properties. But because it looks like a rectangle, and essentially is, it can be promoted also. So I can say Shape, convert to rectangle. Or if you ever have a path, or you ever sort of have a rectangle, and you just want regular rectangle options, you again can do the opposite. You say Object, Shape, and you say Expand Rectangle. And then again, it's just a regular path. And again, the advantage to that, if you expand it, is it has the bounding box that allows you to just transform it with the selection tool. Because remember, a rectangle, you actually have to transform it with the free transform tool. That's the idea there. Got a little bit more to show you guys, and again, we're at 12:40, so we've been going for quite a while here, and I'd like to open this up to see if you guys have any questions as well. But specifically, I want to show you guys the perspective grid. Now, I'm opening up a file here that's using the perspective grid, as you guys can see. Let's make it a little bit larger. Now, this, again, the perspective grid is something you turn on by going to the perspective grid tool. Okay, so the perspective grid tool will, again, activate the perspective grid. If you ever did that by accident, you say View, Perspective Grid, and Hide to hide it. But I want to keep my grid. As soon as you activate the grid, you then use not the regular selection tools, but you then use the Perspective Selection tool. So that you can select objects and then move them onto the grid. So you guys will note this widget in the upper corner is again set to the right side of the grid. So if I select an object, it moves onto the right side of the grid, vanishes back to this vanishing point, and is in perspective. And if I continue to move it around with this tool, it's still in perspective. That's the idea. And therefore, again, can select the other side of the grid here, which is the blue side of the grid, and move these objects over here to the left side of the grid as well. Or I can select an object with the bottom selected and put the item in the foreground down here in perspective to the foreground of the vanishing point. Then I go back to the blue one and move this other card over top of this item to be in perspective. Now, this isn't anything new, of course. Everything I've demonstrated you could have done starting in CS5. And I really like this forced perspective drawing. I'm using two-point perspective, but Illustrator also has presets to allow you to draw again in one-point perspective only, or again, three-point perspective. But here's the new part. In the older version of Illustrator, you can always use the selection, the grid selection tool, so the perspective grid selection tool, to select these objects and move them around in perspective. But if you went back to the grid tool, what happens is with the grid tool, you might want to modify the grid, meaning that when I grab the horizon to switch it, well, again, I would want the artwork to update too. It didn't. And if I grab this vanishing point and move it, the grid moves, but the artwork didn't. Now, that's, again, the way it works in CS5 or CS6. I did an undo, so I did not make any changes to the grid. But if I go to the View menu and I say Perspective Grid and lock Station Point, and what lock Station Point does is it locks this portion, the bottom middle of the grid, and locks that place in place. Now, it's always capable. You can always do that in all versions of Illustrator. But in CC, when you lock the station point and then return not to the grid selection tool, but the perspective grid tool, the tool that edits the grid, note that as I move the actual vanishing points, the artwork updates with it. So I'm able to update the grid and have the artwork move to it. So that was a matter of saying View, Perspective Grid, and lock Station Point first. And then I'm able to, again, modify the horizon line or the vanishing points of the grid, and the objects snap to the grid and they stay in the forced perspective, allowing you to modify the perspective after you've actually drawn the objects. So if you ever use this tool, which is pretty wonderful and pretty easy, as you saw as I was demonstrating, it's not much more to it than what I did demonstrate. It's a matter of drawing into this grid or moving things into this grid, and simply once you're using it, you can lock it and continue to use the grid. Okay, so those are the elements I would like to talk about the most. There are a few other more new features. If you look on the Adobe website, you'll see that there's also new features around type tools and touch type and working from that point of view. But those are the main key elements about the new version of Illustrator I wanted to bring up. Okay? So at this point, I'm in presentation mode, allowing me to speak, but not you guys, right? However, we should be able to modify that. Let's see here. But again, guys, if you do have any questions, please, again, use the chat. Again, be able to read them and, again, put them together. But I'd like to thank everybody for their attention. Hope they got a lot from what we just went through and we're working through. And if you're using Adobe Illustrator, you'll find those things, again, handy when you, again, upgrade or have access to the Creative Cloud version. Okay. So again, guys, 12:45. Thanks, everyone, for their attention, and thanks for what we've just been through. Thanks so much.